Hi everyone, welcome back to another session on the series of MLOps that we are doing. Currently, we are doing the 10th session of MLOps basic series in which we are trying to understand and go through the blocks of Raviraja Ganta. In the last session, we discussed about in the last couple of sessions, we discussed about the model packaging through Docker and Onyx. Once we have done the model packaging, the next steps comes like CI/CD, continuous integration and deployment, and that we are going to learn through the GitHub Actions for doing CI/CD processes. So I hope you already know about CI/CD, which is and for those who don't know, CI/CD is a coding philosophy and set of practices with which we can continuously build, test, and deploy iterative code changes. Now, this iterative code changes or the process helps us reduce the chance that we develop new code based on buggy or failed previous versions. With this method, we have less human intervention or even sometimes no human intervention at all from the development of new code until its deployment. So, for example, a simple pipeline of CI/CD deployment looks something like this, where you as a developer create new branch, then you push the changes to that branch, and then the CI continuous integration process comes into action, in which it does automated build and test, push code fixes, and then again do automated build and test until and unless uh, we review the app and then deploy that particular app. Once we have done that, it goes to review and approval stage where we can review and finalize that thing and then merge that particular branch. And finally, after it in continuous deployment, there is automated build, test, and deploy stage. And once everything is finalized, then the code is deployed to production. And a more complex flow, what this says looks like this, where you create a new branch, create a new pull request, in that try to see code quality, performance testing, unit tests, container scanning, dependency scannings, then push changes to that, then keep on working this particular process, and then once everything is finalized, then you do everything into a package thing, and then finally do the release by continuous delivery and continuous deployment. In continuous delivery, it's like you have to confirm to deploy the code or the app to production. However, in case of CD, continuous deployment, you automatically deploy things to production if it passes all the tests. And for the basic flow, we'll be discussing the basic flow, not going into these much details. Uh, there are many tools from which we perform CI/CD, and one of the most famous ones earlier was the Jenkins one. However, nowadays a lot of companies and most of the companies use GitHub Actions, so we will be discussing about GitHub Actions in the current session we have. And in this particular session, we are going to discuss these five topics in which we discuss about basics of GitHub Actions, doing first GitHub action, and then for creating automated CI/CD for ML models that we had, we will be using the Google Service accounts and then giving access to that, and then finally configuring our data version control to use Google Service account instead of the folder that we created earlier, and then finally configuring GitHub action for integration of Google Service account. Okay. So basics of GitHub Actions. In that particularly, GitHub Actions are just set of instructions that we declare using the YAML files. And for the GitHub Actions, everything is present in .github/workflows directory. And this has to be generally in the root directory that we have generally in the .git, generally where the .git folder is present. And in GitHub Actions, there are particularly 4 or 5 main concepts. First is event. An event is kind of a trigger to workflow. Jobs define the set that it has to run, or maybe, for example, consider a robot, and what all actions it has to perform are considered as jobs. And a workflow can contain multiple jobs. Runners define where to run the code. By default, GitHub will run the code in its own servers, and steps contains actions to run. Each job can contain multiple steps to run. And actions is actions contains actual commands to run, like installing dependencies, testing code, etc. So for first GitHub action, what we will be doing first is just making directory of workflows, and then we'll push a YAML or the workflow file in which we'll define like a this is the name of this particular workflow. Then we have to push it, and the jobs inside this is basic workflow runs on Ubuntu latest steps. Name is this run these three commands, then name uses, and then run name, something like this. So let's understand what is happening here. I'll try to make sure if I'm able to explain this thing properly. So GitHub Actions basic workflow is the name of the job, and then on is generally here the event which triggers the workflow. So if we push the code on GitHub, this event is going to run. This here it is a push event. Whenever pushes happen to workflow will be triggered. And there are a lot of ways to trigger workflow that we will go and go. Then workflow contains a single job called basic workflow running on Ubuntu latest. Basic workflow jobs inside jobs, there is only one job if you can see. Then it runs on Ubuntu latest. And in that there are certain steps. Basic information contains checking the basic information. It just steps contain actions to do some echoing. Uh, then checking out repository steps contain the action to check out the repository. Here we are using actions checkout v2, which is an open source action. And then information after checking out steps contains the action to list files in the repository. It lists all the files, and then finally we do some ls and echoing. So once we commit that file, let's see how it looks on GitHub. Like when you go on the GitHub, there in your repository, you will see an action tab. When you go to the action tab, you'll see the workflows that you have created. In that particularly, go on the uh, workflow that we created. So in the example in this particular figure, we created the added initial week 6 folder. And in this, we are running the basic flow for. And when we go like into the workflow runs, we can see like this particular thing passed all the test or whatever actions that we had, and now it's like ready. It passed successfully. And in that basic workflow, there were around 7 jobs that it had to run, and it ran. In this case, it ran particularly. And then in each of the steps, you can see like what's the thing is like this thing had to echo this thing, and this was what was echoed. Similarly, this was what when we did ls of the directory, this was the results of the ls. So in this case, you can see as we can see by the red action in red, it means the workflow was not performed successfully, and there were some issues in it. So now basically one of the issues that might arise here is when we are doing CI/CD for the model that we have built. For that particular model, we save the latest checkpoint of the model in our Google Drive. And particularly if we were like running all these things in a Jupyter notebook, uh, we were doing the authentication of the Google Drive by placing the code that we had. However, if we are doing the continuous CI/CD pipelines, we are running continuous CI/CD pipelines, then we cannot, if you want to make it automated, then we cannot give it the source token again and again. So for that purpose, we might have, instead of taking that Google Drive account, we might need to create something called as Google Service account. And particularly Google Drive as a remote service. We were earlier doing this. Now, in order to pull the model from Google Drive, we need authentication. Ideally, a link will be prompted, but it will be difficult in a CI/CD. That's why we are using a service account. So basically, what are service accounts? A service account is nothing but a Google account associated with the GCP project. It has nothing to do with the ID that you have. For if you're working in a team, you can have one project, and that project could be shared within the team. But like no particular person, it's not a particular person has can do that thing. So for this thing, like you need to I'll go over these steps in like very basics. You can read through the documentation to do the replicate the same steps by yourself. In this particularly, you go to the GCP console, Google Cloud Platform console, and create a project, and then create a service for creating a service project. You navigate to IAM and domain, and then select service accounts, and then IAM in here, then IAM in domain, then service accounts, and then create new service accounts. Provide a name like model and something like this, and then click on done. So for the key step, you will create a new key, and you will here enable Google Drive API for this project because we were using Google Drive. Manage, give now for this thing, give access to give them more, give them. So now particularly what was happening is we created a folder in the Google Drive. Now we have created a service account which might use the Google Drive API service, and the Drive account that we created earlier for our model. Now we will share that thing with the service account that we have, and from now it's like you try to understand Google Drive API is accessed by your service account, and your service account will be accessed by your GitHub. And now particularly we are configuring our DVC also to use the Google Drive Google service account to, and Google service account will directly use the Google Drive APIs to configure the folders that we have. So we are adding this storage drive, then we are modifying the storage to like Google G Drive use service account, and then we are also passing the credentials that we have the access token for that. So let's understand the command here. We're creating a default remote storage with storage and link, and then configuring the remote storage to use service account, and then providing the credentials. And later we can test this thing, trying to pull the model by this command, like cd dvc files and dvc pull train model.dvc. I understand the video might have gone a little bit longer by now, but like I'll try to, because there's only one step left in which we are going to cover the configuring of GitHub Action. So I'll try to cover this thing in this particular session only. So now before creating a workflow, let's modify the Docker file that we have to accommodate all the changes that we have. So these things were already there. I think like these things were already there. So now we are kind of initializing like a DVC, like these commands that we did now, and then run DVC. We pull this particular model, we do environment lc all lang, and then we run the application. This is hosting fast API. So now we go to the GitHub and create a now either we can do two things. Either we go to our code, create a workflows folder with in the .github directory, and in that create a YAML, or otherwise we can also go to that particular GitHub repository that we have, in that actions, in that create a workflow. In the workflow, we'll write something like a name create Docker container on when we will do this thing. And in jobs, we say the only jobs that you need to do is the MLOps container jobs. So this thing runs on Ubuntu. Defaults run for default working right directory will be week 6 GitHub actions. And then steps, what you need to do is like do checkout. Name is like a checkout. What you need to do is like a checkout at v2 with like a you tell about like the references, GitHub reference, and then finally build container. So in this Docker will create data, Docker will create build, and the tag of that thing will be inference latest, and then Docker will push like a Docker will create a fast API host fast API on the 8000 port, and now everything will be now like once you save the file, like everything is explained in this particular session. So when you push the code to GitHub, this file will automatically run by itself, and if everything passes, then it will show you a green tick. Otherwise, it will show you a red tick, as what we discussed earlier. So thank you everyone for watching till and then. In case if you have any doubts or feedback, please let me know, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.